All vehicles in this neighborhood must allow HOA emergency access. At about 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, I stepped onto my porch to find a woman hunched over my pickup truck's driver's side door, jamming a brass key into the lock. She spun toward me with theatrical outrage. All vehicles in this neighborhood must allow HOA emergency access, she declared. Your refusal is highly suspicious. I hadn't said a single word. When her key failed, she gasped, whipped out her phone, and dialed 911. Hello? Yes. There's a non-compliant resident preventing a mandatory HOA safety inspection on his vehicle. She pointed at me like I'd committed vehicular treason. What she didn't know, the non-compliant male she was reporting was me, Sheriff Thomas Whitmore of this county. 30 years on the force. And I'd never had anyone call the cops on me before 7:30 in the morning. I later learned her name was Victoria Allen. Everyone in the neighborhood called her by another name, though nobody said it to her face. Before she tried to unlock my truck, I genuinely believed she was just another overly enthusiastic HOA president. I'd been wrong about people before, but never quite this spectacularly. To understand how we got here, I need to go back 3 years to when I first moved into Timber Ridge, a quiet cul-de-sac at the edge of the HOA's jurisdiction. My house sat on the property line close enough that Victoria could see it, far enough that she technically had no authority over it. And that technicality was the single greatest frustration of her entire personality. The day she introduced herself, she marched up my driveway with a clipboard under her arm, like a prosecutor heading to trial. Law enforcement vehicles may cause unnecessary alarm, she said, nodding at my patrol cruiser. I'll need you to park that elsewhere. I explained politely that the cruiser was legally registered, legally parked, and legally immune to her personal discomfort. She forced a smile, made a note on her clipboard with aggressive scratching, and walked off like she was filing paperwork for my eventual eviction. Days later, I found a piece of paper taped to my windshield, unauthorized government imagery visible from public view. $45 fine. She meant the sheriff's badge on the door. I actually laughed. I peeled the paper off and tucked it into a binder I'd just created. That binder would eventually become a stack of binders that would bring her down. Over the next year, Victoria issued citations that weren't legally valid papers printed from her home inkjet. Once she fined me for unauthorized terrain modification, tire tracks after rain. Another time she accused me of visual intimidation because sunlight reflected off my truck's chrome grille. But the moment that really set her off was when she asked me to provide HOA with a copy of my car keys for emergency purposes. Absolutely not, I said. She blinked, stunned. Then she lifted her chin and replied, "We'll revisit this." And I should have known that meant trouble. Fast forward to that morning, she jammed her key into my truck and called 911. After Deputy Ray revealed who I was, after she stood there processing that she'd just reported the county sheriff to dispatch, she stormed off in humiliation. But humiliation for Victoria wasn't a deterrent. It was fuel. By the next morning, bright pink flyers appeared on every mailbox, lamppost, and trash bin. Decorated with glitter glue and tiny stars, they read, "Urgent community action required. Stop the non-compliant vehicle." The flyer accused my truck of being a community risk and insisted residents vote to require all neighborhood vehicles to provide universal HOA access credentials. In other words, she wanted a key to everyone's car. My neighbor Mark knocked on my door that afternoon. "Is this about you?" he asked, rubbing his temples. "Apparently," he groaned. "She fined me last week because my car was too red. Said it was visually aggressive. Later that evening, I found a bright yellow notice under my windshield. Notice of parking violation. Excessive vehicle presence. $65. Fine. Excessive presence in my own driveway. I added it to the binder. The next day, Victoria held an emergency HOA meeting. Someone recorded it and sent it to me. Her presentation included a pie chart showing my truck as the #1 cause of community instability, a blurry photo taken from a suspiciously low angle, and a slide titled Potential Threat Indicators, listing size, color, reflectiveness, authority, symbolism, and owner non-compliance. She concluded by declaring the HOA must take immediate action to restore driveway harmony. One resident raised their hand. "Isn't that the sheriff's truck?" Victoria snapped back. "Authority does not exempt anyone from community standards." By the next morning, 3 new notices appeared on my truck: reflective paint disturbance, unauthorized law enforcement symbols, driveway shadow imbalance. She was fining me for my truck's shadow. That's when I realized this wasn't just an HOA spat. Victoria was obsessed with controlling me, my vehicle, and everything within her perceived domain. I began documenting everything meticulously: photos of flyers, email screenshots, meeting recordings, neighbor statements, copies of her so-called master key guidelines. Not out of spite, because I could see exactly where this was heading, toward a legal collision. The next morning, I found 26 neon orange flags lining my driveway in 2 perfect rows. Each flag read, "Gate claim pending," "Vehicle access," "Gate under review." She was planning to build a gate across my driveway. I crouched down and recognized her orthopedic sandal footprints in the soil. Victoria wasn't just reacting anymore. She was planning. She had declared war and crossed the legal line. I photographed every angle, every footprint, every flag position. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Dude, check your driveway." She's lost her mind. Minutes later, I heard Victoria's distinctive footsteps marching down the street. She appeared at the bottom of my driveway, clipboard clutched against her chest. "I see you've discovered the preliminary markers," she said. "The HOA has initiated a vehicle access evaluation for community safety on my property." I replied, "Property lines are fluid when it comes to safety concerns," she said, waving dismissively. "You put these here yourself?" I said, "Of course." I did. The board was unanimous. That was a lie. I knew the board was tired of her antics. They'd apologized to me behind her back. "Is that so?" "Unanimous?" I asked. Well, she shifted. "Unanimous in spirit." Spirit. The best friend of anyone who didn't actually have votes? "Victoria, this is private property. You're trespassing. These flags and this gate have no legal standing," I said firmly. "Not yet," she replied. "I'll be drafting an amendment for the next HOA meeting. The community will vote to place all vehicles within visual proximity of HOA land under shared authority. It's illegal." She scoffed. "Laws adapt. Communities evolve. Besides, residents deserve protection from rogue vehicles." I took another photo of her standing among the flags. She stiffened. "What are you doing?" "Documenting," I said simply. She frowned, recognizing that word could be used against her. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed off. But trouble was far from over. That afternoon, a tow truck pulled up near my driveway. The driver stood, scratching his head, looking at a paper in his hand. I stepped out. "Everything all right?" A lady from the HOA told me this truck was abandoned and needed removal. "I drove it yesterday." He blinked. She also said the owner was refusing to comply with safety checks. I pointed to the sheriff's emblem. "I'm the owner." The man's face drained of color. "Oh, Man, she didn't mention that. He folded the paper and shoved it in his pocket like it was cursed. Sorry, sir. I'm leaving right now. He climbed into the tow truck and took off. I looked at my driveway. The flags. The disappearing tow truck. This was deliberate escalation. Victoria wasn't just trying to control my vehicle. She was building a false narrative to paint me as the problem. I walked back outside and removed every single flag, one by one, photographing the empty ground. I stored them in a box labeled Evidence Vehicle Incidents. The next morning, expecting peace, I found my truck shackled. A giant yellow wheel clamp locked onto the front tire. The bold stenciled letters read, HOA impound, non-compliant vehicle. I crouched down to inspect it. Real metal. Real heavy. A laminated tag dangled from the lock with a payment breakdown. Release fee, $350. Processing fee, $25. Administrative fee, $15. Total due, $390. Victoria had really committed grand larceny today. I heard her distinctive sandal footsteps. She appeared with arms crossed. Well, perhaps now you'll learn to respect community authority, she called. You put a wheel clamp on my truck, I said. It's not your truck. It's a community-adjacent vehicle subject to oversight. Impoundment was necessary after repeated violations. I exhaled slowly. Victoria, this is illegal. This is proactive neighborhood safety enforcement. She corrected, tapping her clipboard. You immobilized a law enforcement vehicle. A vehicle used to intimidate residents. Frankly, you should thank me for committing a crime. She snapped. Remove the clamp. Now, I said, absolutely not. You will pay the release fee just like everyone else. No one else has ever had a boot on their car because no one else has ever been this non-compliant, she said, her voice cracking. My neighbor Jill peeked out from behind her curtain and shook her head violently. No, absolutely not. Caught in her lie, Victoria pivoted. Well, they didn't oppose it. That's not the same thing. It is in spirit, she declared. I pulled out my phone and took photos. Victoria stiffened but tried to hold her ground. She scoffed. You think pictures will scare me? No. But they will help the police. Her lips parted in horror. Police. You wouldn't dare. I dialed non-emergency dispatch and requested a deputy respond for unlawful immobilization of a vehicle. Victoria panicked. You're weaponizing law enforcement. This is harassment. A familiar patrol cruiser rolled into view. Deputy Hernandez stepped out, took one look at the clamp, then turned to me with an expression that said, Not again. Morning, Sheriff, he said quietly. Victoria threw her hands up. Finally, someone reasonable. Officer, arrest him for refusing to follow HOA impoundment protocol. Hernandez stared at her for a long moment. Ma'am, there is no HOA impoundment protocol. There should be, she shouted. That's not how laws work, he replied. She jabbed her pen toward the clamp. This vehicle is out of compliance. I raised a finger. Do not confess to more crimes. Hernandez pulled out his pad. Ma'am, did you place this device on the sheriff's truck? I issued a lawful community corrective action, she said. Did you buy this online? Yes. It's heavy duty and comes in different colors, she said proudly. Ma'am, you cannot immobilize property you don't own. This is tampering and potentially vehicle interference. She gasped. Vehicle interference. How dare you? He's reading the law, I said. This is oppression of the HOA, she shrieked. Hernandez wrote out an official warning and instructed her to remove the clamp. She refused. He repeated the instruction. She refused again. If you don't remove it, we will, he finally said. She glared at him but stomped over, fiddled angrily with the lock, and yanked the clamp off like she was ripping betrayal from her soul. She dragged it away, muttering about tyranny. 2 days later, she returned with reinforcements, not people, just paperwork. Stacks of glossy brochures titled The Great Vehicle Harmony Initiative. She taped them to every door. Bullet points included mandatory HOA access keys for all cars, HOA-controlled parking rotation schedules, monthly driveway compliance inspections, fines for visually disruptive automobile silhouettes. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. That week, I received 13 separate violations. Parking too confidently. Vehicle presence exceeding comfort threshold. Potential intimidation due to height. License plate numerically aggressive. Unauthorized reflective surfaces. Excessive durability. Owner attitude non-compliant. Truck windows too transparent. Driving patterns unpredictable. Tire grooves emotionally sharp. Paint color too authoritative. Shadow cast exceeds 45 feet. Sheriff emblem improper for suburban setting. I documented everything. I made a second binder, then a third. The next escalation came on a Wednesday morning. I returned from the grocery store to find a plywood barricade erected across my driveway entrance. Spray painted, no parking zone, authorized vehicles only bad. A laminated sign hung from the center, violators will be fined. I walked over, lifted the entire structure with one hand. It weighed about 8 pounds, and set it beside a tree with a sticky note. Nice decor. Wrong house. The next day, a city inspector knocked on my door. Got a call from someone claiming there's a dangerous illegal parking structure on this property. She'd called the city on herself by accident. I showed him the makeshift gate. He snorted. Yeah. No. This is not up to code or reality. He took photos, made notes, and left laughing. Victoria watched from across the street, arms folded, seething. The silence that followed was worse than any confrontation. Victoria had disappeared for 48 hours. For someone who thrived on daily micromanagement, that silence meant one thing. She was assembling her next disaster. It arrived on the morning of the third day. I opened my mailbox and found a thick, glossy packet. The cover featured a dramatic photo of a suburban street with animated sparkles around parked cars. Across the top, the Community Vehicle Harmony Initiative presented by Bluff Neighborhood Mobility Council. A council. We didn't have a council. The first page had a letter from the desk of Acting Coordinator K, Victoria Allen. She'd rebranded herself. The letter claimed that due to recent vehicular disturbances, the neighborhood would implement a new set of mandatory regulations. All vehicles must be registered with the Mobility Council. Owners must provide an emergency access key upon request. Driveways may be inspected without notice. Parking zones may be reassigned at any time. Unauthorized vehicle silhouette patterns will incur penalties. At the back was a payment page, Mobility Harmony Contribution Fee, $89 due within 5 days. She'd included a QR code linking to a PayPal account named Bluff Vehicle Safety Fund. I looked up and saw Victoria standing across the street by her Prius. Wearing a navy blazer and fake earpiece that was clearly not connected to anything, she watched me read her packet. Waiting for praise. I held up the booklet. A new council? She nodded proudly. Formed due to community demand. What community? Residents have expressed overwhelming concern. Name one. She blinked. Concerns may remain anonymous. For safety. Victoria. This is fraud. She stiffened. This is community leadership. What you're doing is illegal. What I'm doing is necessary, she said, jabbing her clipboard toward the sky. For who? For everyone. Victoria, you cannot create fake councils to collect fees. You cannot demand keys to people's vehicles. You cannot find shadows. She smiled, a tight, brittle thing. Well, we'll see what the legal advisory panel thinks. Who's on the panel? I asked. She hesitated. Me. I almost choked. So you created a council, appointed yourself coordinator, and then created a legal panel, which is also you. She crossed her arms. Someone has to take responsibility. And that someone is always you. Exactly. Before I could respond, she thrust a clipboard toward me. Sign the compliance acknowledgement. I didn't touch it. No. She scribbled something. Refusal to acknowledge notice. Additional fee, $13. Not 10. Not 15. 13. She walked off smug, convinced she'd won. But she was stapling nonsense to her own downfall. Inside my house, I spread everything on the table. The packet, the fines, the barricade photos, the wheel clamp, screenshots from neighbors. Enough evidence to wallpaper a courtroom. I called the sheriff's office and filed a complaint as a citizen, not as the sheriff. Protocol required another deputy handle it. Hernandez took the report. Bluff Neighborhood Mobility Council. Never heard of it. It didn't exist until today. I said. He whistled. She really doesn't know when to stop. Send me everything. This might cross the line into attempted fraud, he said. That evening, my neighbor Jill approached hesitantly. Can we talk? She whispered. Of course. She stepped closer. We need your help. The HOA board. We're done. She wants weekly driveway inspections, and she tried to fine one of the board members because her SUV felt rebellious. I rubbed my eyes. We've had enough. We want to vote her out. But we need solid, evidence-provable stuff. Things she can't wiggle out of later. I gestured toward the dining table inside. Stacked with paperwork. I've got evidence. Jill's eyes widened. How much? Binders. Plural. 3 so far. She let out a breath, like someone who'd seen daylight for the first time in months. This could work, but you have to be there. The board meeting is Friday. I'll be there, I said. I arrived at the HOA meeting 30 minutes early. The community center hummed with quiet tension. People whispered in clusters. Some clutching copies of the Mobility Harmony packet. Others held their phones with screenshots of fines Victoria had sent. One guy had printed an 18x24 poster of the bogus wheel humility violation with a caption, "How is this real?" Jill approached nervously. Hair pulled back in a stressed-out bun. She doesn't know what we're planning, she whispered. She'll know in about 20 minutes. I replied, the board is united. That hasn't happened in 10 years. Jill said. Residents filed and everyone was waiting for the show. Right on cue. The door slammed open. Victoria swept in like royalty, entering a coronation. Navy blazer. Fake earpiece? Clipboard, like a sacred artifact. Her mobility council packets under her other arm. The room groaned collectively. There will be order, she announced. Jill stepped forward. Thank you all for coming. Tonight's meeting will address... I'll be handling tonight's meeting, Victoria interrupted. Given the heightened threat level to neighborhood vehicular harmony... No, Jill said sharply. You could feel the room freeze. Victoria blinked, taken aback. She wasn't used to that word. No, she repeated. That's correct, Jill said firmly. The board will handle this meeting. You will sit down. Victoria's jaw dropped. Sit down. Yes. In the audience. Like everyone else. Jill said. Victoria's eyes snapped toward me, searching for backup. But I simply folded my arms and leaned against the wall. I wasn't here to save her. I am the HOA president. Victoria hissed. For now, someone in the back whispered. Victoria spun around. Who said that? No one answered. Jill cleared her throat. Please take your seat. Victoria finally huffed and stomped into a metal chair in the front row. The meeting began. Jill introduced the agenda and then moved to the item everyone was waiting for. Today, the board will address the concerning actions taken by our HOA president, including unauthorized fines, fraudulent documents, attempts to collect money under a non-existent organization, and repeated harassment of multiple residents. Murmurs rippled across the room. Victoria shot to her feet. Lies. All of it. I did what I had to do to protect the community from vehicular anarchy. Sit, Jill said. Shockingly. Victoria sat. Jill gestured toward me. That was my cue. I stepped to the front with a simple folder. Nothing flashy. I had evidence. Good evening. I'm Thomas Whitmore. Most of you know me as your neighbor. Some of you recently learned I'm also the county sheriff. I've lived here for 3 years. I never imagined needing to speak at an HOA meeting. But here we are. The room chuckled uneasily. I want to walk you through the sequence of events that led the board to call this meeting. I laid the folder on the table and opened it, revealing photos and documents. First, the incident where Victoria attempted to open my truck using a so-called master key. I held up a photo of her with the brass key in hand. Gasps filled the room. She then called 911 to report me as a suspicious individual refusing an HOA inspection. A collective murmur swept across the audience. She did not know that she was calling the sheriff. I continued laying out each incident. The unauthorized fines. The wheel clamp. The tow truck. The plywood barricade. The neon flags. The fraudulent Mobility Harmony Council. The payment demands. The QR code linking to her personal PayPal. She attempted to collect money through an unregistered organization, which constitutes attempted fraud. Victoria erupted. I was acting in the interest of the community. Victoria, you immobilized a sheriff's truck with a clamp you bought online. That clamp was high quality. She shrieked. A man in the back burst out laughing. Jill held up her hand. Order, please. I finished my explanation. The evidence has been submitted to the county, and the investigation is ongoing. However, the HOA board can take action tonight regarding her status. A board member stood. We move to vote on the immediate removal of Victoria Allen as HOA president. The room erupted in clapping. Victoria jumped to her feet, eyes wild. No, you can't do this. I am the only one holding this community together. Without me, you'll descend into parking mayhem. Jill didn't flinch. All those in favor. Hands shot up across the room. Dozens of them. A tidal wave of fed-up residents. All opposed. Jill asked. Victoria shot her hand up. Alone. Trembling with fury. Jill nodded. Motion carries. Victoria Allen is removed as HOA president, effective immediately. The collective exhale felt like the first breeze after a long drought. Victoria stood in stunned silence. Then she grabbed her clipboard, pointed at me, and shouted, This isn't over. You can't escape Harmony. I will return stronger than ever. And with that, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. The room erupted in applause. People clapped, cheered, laughed. Some even hugged. I just stood there watching the door she'd stormed out of, knowing something the rest didn't. She wasn't done. The evening after Victoria's removal was the most peaceful the neighborhood had felt in months. People walked their dogs, watered plants, washed their cars. But peace is not the end of a story. With someone like Victoria, it's the pause before the next escalation. Victoria didn't show up the next day, nor the day after. Most people celebrated her absence, but I dealt with her long enough to know better. Victoria didn't accept defeat. She repackaged it. A strange envelope arrived in my mailbox on Friday morning. Not HOA branded. Not handwritten. Printed professionally on linen paper. Sealed with a gold circle sticker. The return address? P.O. Box 214. Bluff County Oversight Initiative. Inside was a formal notice. Dear resident, due to recent concerns regarding vehicle compliance and driveway harmony, you are requested to attend a mandatory mediation session with the Bluff Community Oversight Initiative, BCOE. Failure to appear may result in further action. Signed, Acting Coordinator K. Allen. She'd reinvented herself again. A private entity. A fake oversight initiative. She was starting her own department of made-up government. This time she'd included a voluntary community contribution form with a suggested payment of $140 toward a driveway beautification project. The QR code pointed to a PayPal account under her name. She was escalating into fraud territory with confidence that would make a con artist blush. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos of every page, and filed them into my now bulging Karen Evidence Volume 4 folder. Not 10 minutes later, my doorbell rang. It was my son, Marcus. He carried himself steady and alert, like always. I handed him the letter. He skimmed it, then shook his head. She's really trying to reinvent the HOA. Not reinvent. Reincarnate. She sent the same letter to half a dozen residents. Somebody dropped theirs off at the sheriff's office this morning. I poured him coffee. She's doubled down. She's entering criminal territory, he said. This is impersonation of authority and attempted collection of fraudulent fees. Can we charge her? I asked. Not yet. But we can look into it. That evening, my motion sensor flicked on at 11:47. I checked the camera feed. It wasn't wildlife. Victoria stood at the border of my property, just outside the legal line. She wore a reflective vest, cargo pants, gloves, and carried a tape measure, clipboard, and stud finder. She paced back and forth like a surveyor on a very personal mission. She knelt and measured my truck's front tire, scribbled, then measured its distance from the lawn, scribble, then held the stud finder against the fender. I stepped outside onto the porch, arms crossed. Evening. Victoria. She gasped and dropped her tape measure. I was conducting an assessment, she stammered, at midnight. Timing is irrelevant when harmony is at stake. Victoria, get off my property. I have authority under the Oversight Initiative. You have a vest you bought on Amazon. She bristled. A uniform. I stepped forward. You're being recorded. She froze. That was her weakness. Not authority. Not resistance. Documentation. She hated when her actions were captured. She backed away slowly, muttering, "This will not stop harmony. This will not stop the initiative. Then she disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, half the neighborhood found identical envelopes. By noon, I had collected 11 more letters from neighbors. I forwarded everything to Deputy Hernandez. He called 20 minutes later. Yeah, I think we have enough for charges. This initiative isn't registered with the state. She's fabricating documents and presenting them as legal authority. Do what you need to do, I replied. He hesitated. One problem? She's probably expecting retaliation. She might have a meltdown before we can serve the papers. He was right. That afternoon, I heard shouting from the street. I walked out and saw Victoria standing beside her Prius, waving a giant rolled-up poster like a battle flag. The community is at risk, she screamed. The sheriff's vehicle is a threat to harmony. People peeked out of curtains. Some gathered. Then she unrolled the poster. It was a blown-up satellite image of the neighborhood with my truck circled in red marker, surrounded by arrows and labels. Unknown vehicle energy zone. Potential disruption field. Driveway dominance risk. A kid down the street whispered, "Is he a superhero?" Victoria spun on him. No. He is a menace. At that moment, 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled into the street. Victoria paled. Deputy Hernandez stepped out and approached calmly. "Victoria Allen," he said, "we need to speak with you." She puffed up her chest. Ah, finally. Justice arrives. Yes, it does, he said. He handed her a packet of papers. She skimmed the first lines. Then she screamed. Not a normal scream. The sound of a woman whose imaginary empire had just collapsed under real-world law. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "I am the initiative." "No, you are being charged with harassment, falsifying documents, and attempting to operate an unlicensed entity," Hernandez said. "My initiative is legal. It doesn't exist. It exists spiritually." "Spiritual HOA doesn't count," he replied. She stomped, ranted, waved her arms. When she finally ran out of breath, Hernandez spoke again. "Ma'am, you are formally ordered to cease all oversight activity. You are not to contact residents with demands, letters, or directives. Violate this and further action will follow." Victoria stared at me with fire in her eyes. "This is your doing." "No, this is your doing." She got into her Prius, slammed the door, and sped off. For the first time, she didn't yell out the window. She didn't even look back. That evening, the neighborhood felt different, lighter. Parents walked their kids. Teenagers skateboarded. Dogs barked without receiving noise citations. The shadow of Victoria's clipboard tyranny faded, but I knew deep in my gut that she wasn't done forever. Just done here? People like Victoria never disappear. They relocate. Days passed quietly. Then a week. Then 2. Victoria complied with the cease and desist order. Hernandez kept me updated. "She's keeping her distance," he said. "Probably licking her wounds or drawing new maps." Then came the night that confirmed my suspicion. It was close to midnight. I was reading on the porch. My trail cam pinged. Motion detected. Back fence. I opened the feed. A figure stood at the border of my property, just outside the legal line, not crossing it. Just standing there, motionless, staring. A woman, medium height, reflective vest. Victoria. She didn't move for nearly 10 minutes. Not a single step forward. Just stared like she was mourning her lost territory or measuring imaginary lines or promising herself she'd rise again. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees. She'd followed the order. She'd stayed off my land. But the message was clear. She hadn't let go. 2 weeks later, a package arrived by courier. No return address. Addressed to Sheriff's Dad, Cabin 12. I opened it carefully. Pink tissue paper filled the box. Underneath, a smaller silver box. Inside was a glitter bomb. Diffused. Just glitter sitting harmlessly at the bottom like a symbolic threat. There was a note taped to the lid. This is what restraint looks like. You're lucky I'm taking the high road. She wasn't threatening me. She was performing one final act of petty rebellion. My son stopped by that evening. When I showed him the package, he shook his head. She mailed you a disabled glitter bomb as a peace offering / threat symbolic artistry. Peak HOA creativity. I said, she's not coming back. Dad, at least not here. I know, but she's not done. He sighed. No, people like her never are. He was right. Spring arrived. The neighborhood returned to something like normal. Leonard, the new HOA president, sent me a handwritten letter thanking me for my patience. He included a jar of homemade jam. Peace felt possible again. Then Tanya, who worked at the county records office, stopped by with a folder. You need to see this, she said. Inside were documents. Registered paperwork for a new HOA being established roughly 30 miles south in a brand new development. Incomplete. Sloppy. Missing signatures. But one section was filled out clearly. Proposed HOA President Victoria Allen. I closed the folder slowly. She's starting over. Tanya said, new neighborhood, new people to control. They don't know her history. I nodded. They will. Are you going to warn them? No. Some lessons can't be taught. Only experienced. Tanya exhaled. Well, at least she's not here anymore. Exactly. And that's enough for me. Months passed. My son was promoted to chief deputy. The neighborhood regained its sanity. Every once in a while, when I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I'd think back to the chaos Victoria brought. It didn't make me angry anymore. It made me grateful. Because you can't appreciate peace without surviving storms. One morning, a new couple walked down the trail with their dog. They paused at the fork where Victoria once built her plywood barricade, looked around confused for a moment, then continued toward the lake. I waved. They waved back. And I realized something. Community doesn't require control. It doesn't require authority. It doesn't require fines or clipboards or laminated threats. Sometimes all it takes is a wave, a path, and the absence of someone screaming about vehicular silhouettes. Victoria was gone. The cabin was mine again. The neighborhood was free. And somewhere 30 miles south, a new HOA board was unknowingly about to learn that no matter where she goes, Victoria will always bring her clipboard. Real authority doesn't come from titles, clipboards, or made-up regulations. It comes from responsibility, respect, and understanding the limits of your role. Victoria built her world on imagined control. When reality pushed back, she collapsed under the weight of her own inventions. There will always be people who try to impose their will on others, not because they're right, because they're afraid of losing relevance. The best thing you can do is stand your ground, document the truth, and let their actions speak louder than your frustration.